Life has a mysterious way of unfolding in front of us, and while many people think that the moments they live through are random or accidental, the truth is far deeper, because God, in His infinite wisdom, has always been communicating with His children in ways that go beyond the ordinary, and He keeps sending us signs, gentle reminders, subtle whispers, and sometimes even loud warnings to guide us, protect us, and bring us closer to His purpose for our lives. Yet most of us, blinded by the distractions of this world, too often ignore these signs and keep walking in circles, wondering why we feel lost, heavy, and disconnected from the blessings that have always been prepared for us. When God is speaking to you, He does not always use the loud thunder or the blazing fire, for He knows that your heart can only recognize Him when you are willing to slow down and listen. So He places hints in your path, such as the people you meet, the opportunities that suddenly appear, the dreams that stir your spirit at night, or the restlessness that tells you deep down that where you are now is not where you are meant to stay. And when you fail to notice, it is not because God has stopped speaking, but because your eyes and ears have been too focused on the noise of the world instead of the still, quiet voice that is calling you home. How many times have you prayed for direction and then within days found yourself face to face with something that felt unusual, something that made your heart beat faster, something that could have been the answer you asked for, but you dismissed it as coincidence, as mere chance, because you were too busy doubting instead of trusting, too busy reasoning instead of believing, too busy holding on to your own plan instead of surrendering to God's higher and greater plan? The truth is that signs from God are all around you, but they do not always come in the form you expect, because sometimes God will send a sign through a closed door, reminding you that rejection is not failure, but redirection. Sometimes He will send a sign through a sudden delay, teaching you that His timing is perfect even when your patience is tested. Sometimes He will send a sign through pain, allowing you to discover that the storm you are in is preparing you for a victory that will taste sweeter than you ever imagined. And sometimes He will send a sign through peace, the kind of peace that does not make sense to your mind, but settles into your spirit and lets you know that you are exactly where you need to be. Think about the times when your heart told you something was wrong, when you felt uneasy about a choice, when you had a deep sense that the path you were walking was leading you toward trouble, and yet you ignored that inner nudge and later regretted it, because that nudge was not just your mind playing tricks on you. It was the Holy Spirit inside you trying to warn you before you stepped into something that would harm you. But you convinced yourself that it was nothing, and so you closed your ears to God's protection and walked into unnecessary pain. God is always communicating, but He will not force you to listen, because love cannot be forced, it must be chosen. And if you are too caught up scrolling endlessly through social media, comparing yourself to others, chasing money, fame, or recognition, and ignoring the small moments when your soul cries out for rest, then you will miss the voice of God, even though He is right there, whispering to you, reminding you that life is more than possessions, more than popularity, more than comfort, and that your eternal soul matters infinitely more than any temporary satisfaction this world can give. The reason many people ignore God's signs is because they expect something dramatic, like a handwriting on the wall or an angel showing up in physical form. But in reality, God's signs are often wrapped in simplicity, like the verse you randomly open in the Bible that speaks directly to your current situation, or the sermon you stumble across online that feels as if it was written exactly for you, or the kind word of a stranger that answers the question you were asking in your heart, or even the painful ending that pushes you out of a season that was slowly killing your spirit so that you can step into the new season He has prepared.
When you keep ignoring these signs, you are not just rejecting divine communication, you are also delaying your blessing, because every ignored sign becomes another loop around the wilderness. Another cycle of confusion, another season of struggle that could have been shortened if only you had trusted sooner, listened deeper, and surrendered quicker. And this is why so many people live year after year with the same problems, the same habits, the same frustrations, because they are waiting for God to speak louder, while God is waiting for them to simply pay attention to what He has already said. You may wonder why God is silent, but He is not silent. He is patient, and His patience is a sign of His mercy. For He gives you chance after chance to notice, to turn back, to align with His will. And He never stops sending you reminders, whether through blessings that make you grateful or hardships that humble you, through people that inspire you or people that test you, through closed doors that protect you or open doors that promote you. And even through the deepest struggles that break you, He is still speaking, because every moment of your life carries meaning, and nothing you go through is wasted when placed in His hands. If you are reading this right now, let it be clear. This is one of those signs. This is one of those divine confirmations. This is God telling you that you have ignored Him for too long, and He is calling you back to awareness, calling you to open your eyes, open your heart, and realize that He has been guiding you all along, and that the very fact you found these words is not an accident, but a deliberate reminder from heaven that God's hand is still upon your life, His plan is still intact, and His love for you has never faded. You do not need to wait for another disaster, another heartbreak, another breakdown before you start listening. You simply need to pause right now, quiet your restless thoughts, and pray. Lord, open my eyes to see your signs. Open my ears to hear your voice. Open my heart to follow your will. Because when you pray this sincerely, you will notice what you once ignored. You will hear what you once dismissed. You will understand what you once resisted. And your entire life will shift as you walk in alignment with the one who created you. So many people spend their lives begging for miracles while overlooking the small daily signs that God is already with them, protecting them from unseen dangers, providing for them in ways they take for granted, healing them in ways they cannot measure, and preparing them for blessings bigger than they can imagine. So do not let pride, busyness, or doubt blind you to the reality that every day is filled with evidence of His presence, and every step is surrounded by signs pointing you back to Him. God is sending you many signs, but the question is not whether He is speaking. The question is whether you are willing to listen, whether you are humble enough to see, and whether you are courageous enough to act. Because once you stop ignoring and start trusting, once you surrender your distractions and truly pay attention, you will realize that the signs were never hidden. They were always right there, waiting for you to notice. And when you finally respond, your life will never be the same again.
And perhaps the greatest tragedy of ignoring the signs that God sends is not simply that you miss out on a blessing, but that you begin to live a life that feels heavy and directionless, a life where you try to carry burdens that were never yours to carry, where you fight battles that God had already won for you, where you chase after things that will never satisfy your soul, because when you refuse to notice God's signs, you are essentially saying that your own wisdom is enough, and yet your own wisdom keeps leading you into confusion, while God's wisdom was always waiting to lead you into peace, prosperity, and purpose. It is important to understand that when God shows you a sign, He is not trying to control you or force you into obedience, but rather He is extending His hand of love, saying, "My child, I know what lies ahead of you, and I can see the dangers that you cannot see. I can see the traps the enemy has set. I can see the heartbreaks that wait in the shadows, and I am trying to redirect you, not because I want to take away your joy, but because I want to preserve it, protect it, and multiply it." When you ignore these signs, it is like walking through a dark forest with a lantern in your hand, but choosing to put the lantern down and stumble in the darkness. And although the lantern was always available, you decided to rely on your eyes instead of the light, which means that the pain you feel from bumping into obstacles is not because God abandoned you, but because you abandoned the guidance that He had already placed in your hands. And if you would simply pick it up again, you would find that the path is not as confusing as it seems. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness, how God gave them a cloud by day and fire by night, clear signs of His presence and direction, and yet even with visible miracles they often grumbled, doubted, and ignored Him, choosing instead to focus on their hunger, their thirst, and their fear. And as a result, their journey to the Promised Land was prolonged, and many of them never entered it. which shows us that the danger of ignoring God's signs is not that God will stop being faithful, but that you might delay your own destiny because you refuse to align yourself with His leading. God is constantly placing signs in your path, but you must understand that signs are not just meant to be admired or noticed, they are meant to be followed. Because if God gives you a sign that it is time to leave a toxic relationship and you stay, the sign becomes meaningless. If He gives you a sign that it is time to step into a new opportunity and you hesitate, the sign becomes wasted. If He gives you a sign that you must repent and turn away from a sin that is slowly destroying you and you continue to indulge in it, then the sign becomes ignored. And with every ignored sign, your heart grows a little harder, making it even more difficult to hear His voice the next time He speaks. And yet, even when you ignore Him, His mercy does not run out. His patience does not collapse. His love does not fade, because He keeps sending you reminders. He keeps tugging at your heart. He keeps arranging circumstances to bring you back to Him. He keeps orchestrating moments that shake your spirit awake. Because His desire is not to punish you, but to save you, to restore you, to lift you higher, to show you that the signs are not just random experiences, but sacred markers pointing you back to the eternal truth that your life belongs to Him and Him alone. So now the question that must echo in your heart is this: how many more signs will God need to send before you finally pay attention? How many more closed doors will you try to force open? How many more sleepless nights will you endure? How many more disappointments will you suffer before you finally admit that the signs were always there, that God was always speaking, that His love was always reaching, and that the only thing left to do is surrender, trust, and obey?
Why it's better to be feared than loved. Machiavelli's brutal truth. When we speak about power, authority, and leadership, when we peel away the illusions that society likes to wrap around these subjects, and when we examine them not with the eyes of a dreamer, but with the vision of a realist who dares to confront the darkest sides of human nature, we are inevitably brought to the doorstep of Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine thinker whose name has become both infamous and immortal, because he did not write to soothe, he did not write to comfort, but he wrote to expose the brutal, sometimes disturbing truths of politics and survival. And among his most enduring lessons stands a question that has echoed for centuries, a question simple in form but profound in weight. Is it better for a ruler to be loved or to be feared? And if one cannot be both, which is safer? Which is stronger? Which ensures survival in a world where betrayal comes quicker than loyalty, and where human affection is as fragile as glass? Machiavelli's answer, stripped of sentiment and clothed only in cold logic, is as unsettling as it is unforgettable. It is better, far better, to be feared than loved, because love is soft and unstable, while fear is hard and enduring, and because love depends on the goodwill of men, but fear depends on their instinct for survival, and survival is the one constant that shapes human action when all illusions are stripped away. To understand this brutal truth, we must begin by recognizing what Machiavelli saw so clearly, that human beings are not creatures of consistent virtue or steady devotion, but are creatures of shifting desires, fleeting emotions, and restless ambition. That men speak of loyalty when it benefits them, that they praise kindness when it feeds them, that they cheer their leaders when fortune shines, but that when fortune fades, when hardship demands sacrifice, or when self-interest whispers a different promise, their affections dissolve like smoke, and the very ones who once adored you may be the first to betray you, often without hesitation and often without guilt. Machiavelli describes love as fragile, not because it lacks beauty, but because it lacks weight. It binds rulers to their subjects with threads of affection that can be broken by hunger, by envy, by fear, or by opportunity. It is a rope of sand, appearing to hold firm until the first test comes and then collapsing in the winds of necessity. It is the applause of the crowd that vanishes the moment the performance ends. It is the gratitude of the people that fades the moment their needs are not met. It is the admiration that endures only until resentment finds a reason to rise. And what is gratitude but a fleeting guest that visits briefly and disappears when the conditions change? What is affection but a weak shield that cannot withstand the storms of misfortune? And what is loyalty born of love but an unreliable fortress that crumbles when pressure mounts, leaving the ruler exposed and betrayed at the very moment when strength is most needed? Machiavelli points to history itself as the testimony of this truth, for countless princes believed they were beloved by their subjects, only to discover too late that the same crowds who once cheered their names would later cheer their executioners. Fear, however, operates on a different foundation altogether, because fear does not ask for affection, it does not rely on sentiment, and it does not depend on the fickle nature of goodwill. Instead, fear is tied to the most basic and unchanging instinct of man, the instinct to survive. And it is this instinct that creates a more enduring form of obedience, one that remains even when fortune turns, one that persists even when admiration fades, one that is steady even when resentment brews in silence. Because fear does not dissolve in the face of hardship, but grows stronger. For when men consider betrayal under the rule of a feared leader, they do not ask themselves, "How much do I love my ruler?" They ask instead, "How heavy is the cost of disobedience?" And that calculation, rooted in the preservation of their own lives, restrains their hand from treachery even when their heart burns with discontent.
And maybe right now you are watching this not by accident, not because you just randomly scrolled and stopped, but because God Himself placed this very message in your path. And while you might be tempted to think it is just another video, just another voice, just another set of words, I want you to pause and recognize that sometimes God uses the smallest things, the things we least expect, to deliver the biggest reminders. And if you ignore even this moment, then you may be ignoring the very confirmation you prayed for in the secret place when no one was watching and your tears were falling like rain on your pillow. There are people who keep asking God for a miracle, asking Him for a breakthrough, asking Him to reveal His will, yet when the answer comes, it does not look like what they imagined, and so they dismiss it. They push it away. They say to themselves, "This cannot be God." And yet what they do not realize is that God rarely moves in the way you picture Him, because He is not limited by your imagination. He is not bound by your expectations. He is not confined to the boxes you try to put Him in. And so the signs that He sends are often wrapped in ordinary moments, ordinary people, ordinary words, but behind that ordinariness is extraordinary power, if only you would slow down long enough to perceive it. Think about how many times you felt a heavy weight on your spirit that something was wrong and you ignored it, only to later find yourself in regret because you realized the uneasiness was God's way of warning you before the storm came. Think about how many times a door slammed shut and you cried as if it was the end of the world, only to later discover that if that door had remained open, it would have destroyed you. Think about how many times you lost something you thought you could not live without, only to find that the loss forced you into a greater blessing that you would never have reached otherwise. These are not random events. These are signs, whispers, directions, and messages that heaven itself orchestrated for you. But the tragedy is that so many people keep running, keep resisting, keep hardening their hearts, and in doing so, they treat God's signs as interruptions rather than invitations. They treat them as obstacles rather than opportunities. And because of this, their lives remain in cycles of frustration, wandering in circles like Israel in the desert, going year after year without entering the promised place. Not because God failed to guide them, but because they failed to notice the very signs that were meant to lead them forward. And yet here is the beauty of God's mercy, that even in your disobedience, even in your stubbornness, even in your blindness, He still sends another sign and another, like a loving father who never gives up on his child, patiently waiting for the moment when your eyes finally open, patiently waiting for the moment when your ears finally hear,
patiently waiting for the moment when your heart finally softens, because his goal is not to condemn you, but to bring you back into alignment with the destiny he has written for you since before you were even born. So the message that is echoing in this very moment is simple yet urgent. God is sending you signs. Do not keep ignoring them. Do not keep brushing them aside. Do not keep explaining them away, because every time you reject his guidance, you are adding more weight to your soul, more distance to your journey, more pain to your path. And the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to undo the consequences. But the moment you surrender, the moment you acknowledge his signs, the moment you choose to trust him fully, everything can begin to shift, doors can begin to open, peace can begin to flow, and what once felt confusing will suddenly begin to make sense.